we were in a taxi, so we weren't driving ourselves, and one of the kids bent down because he dropped a bit of Lego and was on the floor of the car, at which point a camel smashed into the car, and the window that was right next to him smashed and broke and went all over us. But if he'd have been sat up, he would have got it full force in his face. As it was, the camel got up and ran away, and we got out of the car, and people appeared from nowhere, and we lifted the back seat out of the car and shook off the glass and got back in and carried home. But my sister was later saying, we were remembering that you were travelling that day, and we prayed and asked God's protection on you.
Hi guys, welcome back to Raw Mission, the podcast where we bring you challenging and inspiring stories of ordinary folks sharing the good news of our extraordinary God in some of the toughest parts of the world. I'm Matt, your host, and today I've got Harriet with me. She's from the north of England. She raised her 3 kids while adopting an urban poor lifestyle in West Africa for many years, and now heads the member care team in our British office. We discuss the joys and hardships of communal living, a powerful story of peacemaking and reconciliation between local enemies, a friend who was killed, and much, much more. Well, today it's a great joy to have a friend and a colleague with me on the podcast. Hi, Harriet. Welcome.
Hello, Matt.
Harriet is our head of member care at Frontiers in the British office here. And we actually started at a fairly similar time. When did you start work here, Harriet?
I came to the office in 2014.
Okay, yeah, just a year or so after me. And actually our time on the field overlapped as well, because you were in West Africa for quite a few years. When was that?
We went in September 2000, just clocked up our 23rd anniversary of launching, and we came back in 2012.
Okay, yeah, very similar to me actually. Most of that decade was when I feel Pakistan was my home as well. So yeah, I'd love to hear about West Africa, but we'll go back a little bit. Tell us how you started thinking of global mission, serving the Lord overseas.
Yeah, well, I'd been a Christian for a long time, following Jesus, and I knew I wanted to do something in life that was important, more than maybe comfortable, but I didn't really know what that looked like. And I left school, did a gap year, went to university, and then at university I took a trip to India. I was travelling with a student friend and we visited friends, and but in India I saw huge poverty, and we were ripped off. I knew nothing about crossing cultures. It was really tricky, and there were a lot of poor people. And I remember saying to the Lord, I don't want to go and see such poverty again unless I live there and I become part of the community, I learn the language, and I really belong. He was listening. I didn't know what I was really saying at that point. But at church, I met a chap who then became my husband, but he'd spent a gap year in Sudan, at which point God had said to him, you will come back to Africa and serve me amongst Muslims. So as we got to know each other, we realised that maybe my idea of doing something important rather than comfortable, and his idea of serving overseas would be actually quite a good match. We did a test trip because he'd been to Africa a number of times, I'd never been. So we went to Uganda with a sort of, dare I say it, paint the orphanage type short-term event, and we were taken to visit some missionaries working there, and somebody said in the group, oh, do you know, I could be a missionary here if I lived like them, because they live just like they would if they were back home. And I was just like, no way, I wouldn't want to live just like I do back home. I would really want to be local as much as possible. We then took a trip to Kenya, because by then we had 2 small boys and we wanted to see what happened if they put their feet on African soil. We had no sense that God was calling us to Kenya, but there was something about that trip where we knew we were in the right place at the right time, doing the right thing. God was holding us, and we had a huge sense of peace. So that was phenomenal. And I remember saying to the Lord, I don't care where I have to go in the world, but I would want to know that peace.
Wow, that's interesting. With 2 young kids, how old were they?
They were 3 and 1 and a bit.
That's a big challenge, yeah, to head off and travel with little ones into an unknown situation. Just before you move on with your story, what would you say were the sharp contrasts or the similarities between your visit to India and your little exploratory trips into Kenya and so on?
I mean, India, we were very much tourists and just wanted to just sightsee a bit and explore. There wasn't a sort of deeper purpose to it. I was with a student friend.
It's quite daunting to single females traveling around India, because it's quite a sort of in-your-face type of culture, lots of attention, lots of
so much
interest from local men, I'm sure.
And they're so used to tourists, and we were absolutely, not totally gullible, but it was hard. Eventually I picked up a stomach bug, which grounded me for about 10 days. So that helped with just my regrouping that was needed. And at that point, saw some nature and mountains, which was lovely.
But very different challenges. Suddenly being married
and traveling with children.
And having children. So your focus is quite divided in some ways.
Well, except for we were living with a purpose. We were exploring and we were listening to God. What did he actually want for us? This wasn't about me and having an experience of crossing cultures. This was about what's God saying? What do we need to be hearing from him during this time? And there were a number of things, but it was just really helpful to travel. And it's very grounding traveling with kids and as a family, because you take your family culture and your family relationships with you. You really do. You don't suddenly become different people when you head out overseas. You're still the family, and you've still got the upbringing to do, and a lot of the challenges that you have back in the home countries you have overseas too. But so yes, we had kids to feed, and one who'd only just learnt to walk, and we were just doing life as a family, but we were listening for what God wanted to show us as we travelled, and that was very significant.
Was there anything about Africa itself that just you felt at home there, I suppose, like your husband had? And I suppose the other thing is, what about just being in a communal culture with kids? Because there are advantages too, aren't there? Where they'll just sort of scoop up your babies and go off with them and this isn't just me and my kids or my family. We are welcomed into a larger community.
Yeah. I think that happened less, certainly on the Kenya trip. It didn't really, we were tourists really, even though we were visiting a friend who was working there. Uganda was funny because we were part of a group and we were introduced to the people in the children's home, and they looked at us all, and it took them a little while, and they realised that, Andrew and I were married. So suddenly this young girl that they saw as a sort of person of little value, I sort of went up in value. And then they heard that I had a son, and it's like, whoa. So now I went up another level, and 2 sons, and up another level. But then they discovered that the second son was only 9 months old. And how could I, as a mother, have left him? It's like snakes and ladders. How could I have left him behind with the grandparents to come on this trip? And suddenly, down the snake, and I was at the bottom again. I mean, it wasn't a huge thing, but it was just a recognition of the cultures and the different values.
How long was the trip then?
Oh, it was only about 10 days.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting, because for some, the huge challenge would be taking young kids into an unknown situation and culture. Yeah. And for others, I suppose, leaving young kids with grandparents would be a much greater challenge. So how did you know they were disapproving, or you were going up and down the sort of social status ranks?
I saw their faces.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. It was a bizarre thing for them, but it was interesting, and seeing it with hindsight and West African eyes, I can see just how funny that was.
Were you getting criticism at this end as well in the north of England?
No, people thought it was fine. It was great. There wasn't any issue from a Western perspective. You can leave kids with grandparents, and they had a great time.
And what about just thinking about moving your whole family to West Africa? Did you get any kickback at this end from, well-meaning relatives or friends?
Yeah, but the parents or grandparents were broadly supportive, somewhat questioning. Certainly when they heard where we were going to go and how we were going to live, that was a big gulp for them. But they were willing to release us. We had 2 boys initially, but then during the process of finding where we were going to go, we had our daughter, and so we were exploring, and I was pregnant, and then I gave birth, and people were like, "Are you really going to take a small baby?" I was like, well, yes. This was always the intention of having children. And people did wonder whether this was such a good idea, because by then, of course, we knew where we were going to go and how we were going to live. But the Lord showed me a verse in Jeremiah, which was so powerful for me and helpful, because God had spoken in these different pieces so clearly that we needed to be there. we knew that was our obedience. That was what he was asking us to do. And we wanted to teach our kids to obey God. And how could we possibly teach them to obey God unless we were willing to do that? And he was promising, in a sense, to be with us. And the verse is from Jeremiah 32, 38 and 39. They will be my people, and I will be their God. I will give them singleness of heart and action, so that they will always fear me for their own good and for the good of the children after them. And to me, that was God's commissioning. It's like, yes, I am asking you to do this. This is obedience, and it'll be good for you if you fear me, obey me, but it will be good for your children too. So that was something that we hung on to and stood on.
That's really good. That's a beautiful promise. And I love the fact that it talks about the fear of God. Not talked about much in the church these days. But yeah, I mean, I can't remember who said it, but if you fear God, you don't have to fear everything else. Or everyone else. And there's that one fear, that's so important. And then it helps us with all the other fears. Doesn't mean we don't have other anxieties and fears, but it does triumph over them and releases us. So yeah, that's a brilliant verse. I think I need to go ponder on that one. Okay, so tell us how it developed then into moving out to West Africa. Did you find frontiers, join a team, and so on?
Right, so yeah, shortly after the trips we'd made, we were at a big church conference camping thing, and we went to explore different the exhibition hall, and we were on our way to one that we'd heard of before, a mission organisation, and on the way we came across this one that we hadn't heard of at all before, Frontiers, and it talking about working in teams and that the church does the sending, and it's not that sort of the church releases somebody off and the organisation takes over. It was very much the church does the sending, and we were very significant in the heart of our church. Andrew had been an elder for a number of years, and they were watching us and watching to see what God was going to do with us, and they didn't want to hand us over and let go. They really wanted to be very much part of the sending and ongoing care for us. And so we began a conversation with Frontiers, and very quickly it was clear for us and our elders that this was the organisation to go with. So the next question was then, well, where? And I didn't really have a clue. I knew I'd married the right guy and it was going to be somewhere overseas. Andrew definitely heard Muslim, so that's why we were with Frontiers. So then somebody had the bright idea of inviting us to the big conference for 24 hours, speed dating, and we met a number of different
Frontiers conference?
Yes, it was. It was the biannual conference, and just happened to be at a convenient moment for us. And we speed dated about 6 different teams. Our elder came with us, and we just listened to different people's situations and stories, and discussed and asked whatever questions, and then we took a quick break and turned around, fetched another drink and went back and continued the next conversation with the next person. But 2 different groups said, this is what we're doing, but let me tell you about this friend of ours who's working in West Africa, and he really needs people coming alongside. And actually, the more they unpacked that, and we discovered things like they needed a finance person, and my husband was an accountant, and he had done accountancy because God had said that's going to be your passport to overseas work. Wow. And so, but they were, one of the couples worked in the same country, but not the same city team, and lived a very simple lifestyle. Okay, so I had 2 small boys and I was pregnant with the 3rd child, and said, okay, so simple lifestyle, no running water, no electricity or limited electricity. How do you do that with small children? And how do you do life? And we sat down the next morning and just unpacked all of these things, and she gave me very straightforward, simple answers. And I thought, that works. And so we came back from that feeling this was what we needed to pursue. Our kids, when we got them back, I said the boys were cleaning their teeth, and I said, some people don't have running water. Oh, what do they do? I said, well, I think they've got a big tub of water and they dip a cup in and pour it over their toothbrushes, and they're like, okay, yeah, that works. And I thought at 3 and 4 kind of age they were at that point, it's like, It's very simple.
Yeah.
You just show them a different way of doing it and they go, okay. And it was great. And that was the beginning of
Probably more adaptable than we are in some ways, aren't they?
Yeah, and I think a lot of it, as long as we were secure in what we were doing and felt it was right and brought them along, it was just a good fit.
Wow. Okay, so then you sort of had that journey with your church. They felt good about it. You'd met the right team, found the right organisation for you. And
well, we made a visit. That was the next thing. Okay. We took a visit to visit this team because the actual team leaders were not at the conference. So we needed to go and meet them and the situation. And we landed and we were greeted by the people we had met because they were in the city about to fly out. And they asked Andrew, so what if it's not this, what's plan B? I was like, back to square one. It was the only plan we had. But then he took Andrew to go and visit the team leader. And Andrew stepped into the compound, which was simpler than where we had just stayed the previous night. And Andrew's thought was, oh my word, really? Because it was the poor neighbourhood, concrete block housing, dust, sandy ground, no electricity, I think, at that point in that neighbourhood, really, and no running water.
Was there a well for water, or how did that work?
No,
rainwater.
There wasn't enough rain. There was water points, and donkey carts with barrels would bring it round the neighbourhood, or you could take your bucket to the water point.
And whose job was that? The man, the woman?
The donkey cart people were always men, but it was the women who largely fetched water, yes. So they would be the ones who carry it on their heads. But on that visit, I sat there in all of their simplicity, poverty, the farmyard of, there were goats and sheep and everywhere. And I had that peace. It was awesome, really awesome, properly awesome, because I knew God was asking us to make this huge step from our quite comfortable and ordinary life with real, husband having a real job, to stepping out with the kids on this journey. But we absolutely knew it was right. So I made my list of, okay, so what would I bring if I was coming back? And I just went away with a list, and we moved back about 8-9 months later.
Wow. Now, were there other families on the team with kids, or were you guys the first ones?
No, there were other families, kids slightly older, slightly younger.
So someone had paved the way a little bit.
Yes.
Which really helps, doesn't
Absolutely.
it?
Absolutely. Yes, those kids just welcomed our kids in and basically taught them how to live in that kind of neighbourhood. Our kids then went off to the posh French school in town, so they were juggling cultures, but they had a Western education, even living where we did, so that worked well for them.
Okay. What were the team there to do?
They ran an NGO, and it was a feeding program. So with the drying out of the desert, there were a lot of people who had come into the city, and the city couldn't sustain that number of people. There's a lot of poverty, and so there was an agreement with the US government to provide food through feeding centres, nutrition, and so our team ran different centres across the city. That was what they were doing for many years. When we came, it evolved over time. We tried to get more into community development and less of the sort of policing big food program.
Okay, and what was the vision in terms of disciple making? Did you have one people group, for example, or was it the area of the city you were focused on? Or?
The country was made up of two main people groups, the Arabic people and then the nomadic, more black African from the south, and it's a country with sort of both populations going on. And the team was working with both sets of people, with some members of the team concentrating on one and some on the other.
Okay, so how did that affect your language learning? Did you get some serious months and time to get into language?
Yeah, with the kids in school and a lady looking after our 1 year, 11 months when we went, we had lots of sort of formal language lessons and things. And it wasn't until after a few months we took a trip. Our team leader thought some language and culture trip down in the village would be great. He hadn't actually been to the village that he sent us to at that point, and is still somewhat apologetic for having done so, because we turned up after about 9-10 months for a month. Well, 2 weeks in this village and 2 weeks in a slightly larger town. took 3 days to get there because the car kept breaking down, and then we couldn't find the village, and we came across this sort of big, barren, open space with a few mud huts, and suddenly it was like, yes, we're here. I want to think, yes, we're here. It's great to be here, but it was a tough place. Gosh. It was really hot. These were nomadic people, so a lot of them were off with their cows, looking for grass, and the sheep too. And it was their season where they were beginning to plant for the next season. And I looked at their horses and thought, gosh, they're pretty skinny, these 2 horses that are meant to do the ploughing. And then you looked at the people and thinking, well, why aren't they working? This is the sowing season. This is the rains are coming. And why aren't they getting on with it? And you thought, oh no, they're as tired and exhausted as these horses are. These are all skinny people. And we had a huge privilege to come alongside and experience something of the annual cycle of plenty or moderate supply to really living at the very ends of what you had. And it was a huge privilege. It was really tough. We feel, I've said that that village was branded on us. It cost us a great deal being there, but we grew to really love the people, and went back a number of times over the years and saw some remarkable changes there. But it was a very tough place to be for that first visit.
I bet. Yeah. How did they welcome you? Did they know you were coming?
They knew we were coming. A guy from the city came with us, and he had many relatives in that village, and he hadn't been there for a long time, which didn't help with finding it. But he was our sort of bridge, and he knew French, and so he was a sort of language bridge as well when we were stumbling. Oh, there was so much going on. They really didn't have much of an idea of the outside world, hadn't travelled very far. A lot of the women had barely gone to the next village.
Would they come and touch your kids' hair and their skin and just the amazement of seeing very different people amidst...
Yes, and the kids would sort of sit on my kids' laps and just like squash right out. I mean, personal space didn't exist, right. and we didn't really understand what was going on. I mean, that's what cultural learning's about. So we just kept being told, come here, do that, and it's like, oh, but then nothing happens. And we got fed at midnight, and that was quite tricky for the kids. Eventually they understood that didn't work. But it was a people that there'd been quite some tensions in about the early 90s between these 2 people groups in the country. And the people that we were visiting had been pushed off their land at that time, but had come back. I'm not going to all the politics of it, but they'd come back to try and reclaim land, and they'd picked this barren place because they couldn't get back into their village. It had been taken over. And they were harbouring bitterness about that. And so every evening they were playing taped local music, but they were chanting the names of the people who had died in this huge events where people had been cast out of off their land and had their animals taken and lives lost. And so that was a huge thing that they were harbouring. And it was just it was unkempt, the village. The men ordered the women around. The women shrieked at the kids, and the kids took it out on the animals or the younger siblings. It was a harsh place. But gradually over the years, there were a number of really good things that we had the huge privilege of being part of. I mean, a major thing was when, before a trip down, Andrew was going by himself. He really felt the Lord saying he needed to challenge them about reconciliation and seeking forgiveness for harbouring this bitterness. And he went down and he brought this to them. He travelled with the same guy we'd travelled with initially, and he shared with him, and the guy said, yes, you need to take it to the elders of the village. So Andrew did, and then they went off, which just never happens, leaving Andrew by himself, thinking, oh gosh, what have I done? But I felt like it was what God was asking of him to do. But eventually they came back and they said, no, you're right. We've been holding bitterness against these people. You have the car, please take us to go and visit the village. And they all sat round, all the village people there, and they said, please forgive us. We've held bitterness against you for...
That's crazy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, they didn't come seeking an apology for the violence or the...
No, they owned their own. They owned their bit, and the other guys said, "Well, we need to ask your forgiveness for taking taking your village. They didn't give the village back, but they did say, what we're doing here is so important, so significant, because often people from villages go and work elsewhere, travel for work in other countries or in the city. And they said, we need to let everybody know we've done this.
So these are nomadic Muslim peoples going to talk to the Arab Muslim peoples of the same country and make reconciliation.
Yes.
None of these have become believers at this point. Yes,
no.
This is just kingdom transformation impacting societies.
Yeah.
Almost like a pre-discipleship before anyone's come to Christ.
Yes. I don't think they had at that point at all. I mean, the guy who bridged the gap, he was a believer.
Okay.
But the village hadn't made any huge steps at that point.
That's interesting that as a mediator, perhaps his faith enabled him to take that courageous step to bring it to the elders.
Yeah.
Wow.
And what was remarkable then was our next trip back, I just said, the whole village has changed. They weren't playing those tapes anymore, but what was much more important was that the guys, they weren't camping on that land anymore. They were beginning to invest in it, and they were taking care of it. And they were at a level of peace that they had not known before. And that was being outworked in the family relationships and in how they took care and were investing in their place, because they were no longer thinking, we ought to be somewhere else.
Yeah, we can't settle here because we're waiting to get our land back. Yeah, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
Wow, I love that. Okay, so that was a deeply impacting sort of part of your journey. Going out to an even tougher place to live for a short while. Give me some day-to-day anecdotes of how you lived, whether it was cooking or bugs or, I don't know, just, try and sort of paint a picture for us so we can imagine it.
Yeah, so our first year we spent in a tiny little compound. We had 3 tiny rooms, and we shared with a family who had lots of children, but they were very poor, but they were very respectable and well-respected people in the community. So we came in under their covering, which was huge, and we learnt to live with them. There was no running water, so we shared a toilet and a shower cubicle, which was, you take your bucket of water in there and pour it over yourself, and it was very basic. I cooked on a gas bottle. Everything was at floor level living. There was no tables and chairs. That would have cluttered. That was just, it wouldn't have worked. But cooking with a small baby or a young toddler was challenging. I would often cook while she had a nap, because that was safer, or put myself between her and the gas bottle. But yes, we learnt to live there. That was great. Discovered after the first hot season that where we were sleeping outside that actually I shouldn't have ever been lying on my back, that was seductive and that was wrong. I shouldn't have done that in public. But you discover these things along the way. Yes. I discovered just before the next hot season, it's like, oh my goodness, they're all of last summer. That's why they used to giggle at me. Okay. Nobody told us.
Is this in the courtyard or up on a roof?
Yes, in the courtyard.
Okay.
So we just had tin roofs in that place.
Just sort of sleeping on mats out there?
Yes, just roll out a mat, and we took our mattresses out.
And the local family also?
They did the same, yes. Yeah. Okay. Nobody stayed inside in the hot season. So we lived a very public life, but I did sit on the steps of one of our rooms and just ponder, like, how does this work? Because we're eating really great food that I've bought in the market and cooked, and it's a whole scale above what our neighbours are eating. And we would always pass leftovers. We didn't have a fridge, so we passed leftovers for the kids always in the neighbourhood. So we take them next door. But we think, so our kids are going off in the French school and they're collected in a taxi, and how do we live with integrity? But we're just so privileged compared with them, even living alongside them, and yet with a sort of every so often imagining some of our friends from the UK seeing us living there and thinking, oh gosh, we've changed so much in our lifestyle, but we're not really living like the local people. But anyway, the Lord just really said, look, it's much more important to them that they see you are happy living amongst them. They don't expect you to live exactly like them.
Yeah, you can't.
But if you step over, I realized if I stepped over and given up things that were really helpful to us long term in the big picture of the family, like the French school, then that would have been really hard, and I might have resented being there, and that would have come across. Whereas making the compromises that we did, enabled us to live well there and share life. And they saw that we loved being there. And that was actually the crucial thing.
I want to mention an event we've got coming up in the UK on Saturday the 18th of November. It's our Frontiers Neighbours and Nations Day Conference in Oxford, where we'll be gathering to worship, to pray and to connect with you, our friends and supporters. There'll be seminars to encourage and equip you, time for you to meet workers from the field and those preparing to go, a free lunch and even a live Raw Mission podcast where you can be in the audience. Reserve your place on our website or email booking@frontiers.org.uk. Hope we can see you there. I didn't, in Pakistan they have sort of charpai beds, and even if they're string beds, you know, if you're traveling, you can find somewhere to sleep. They don't tend to sleep on mats on the floor much, but a couple of times I went off into the villages in the mountains, and they just have the sort of cushions around the floor in a room, and all the men would sleep in that area. But one time I remember there were dried apricots in the corner, and all sorts of critters were running over us in the night. Did you have any of that going on?
I think because it was so dry, we didn't have a lot of really nasty things, but there were loads of cockroaches, and there were certainly mosquitos. Somewhat, thankfully, not malaria in the city, although we used to have to take precautions going down into the villages. But often you'd have a mosquito net up just to keep the cockroaches out. Because it's not much fun when one runs across your face or whatever. And then we had a lot of visitors at different times. I remember showing visitors round and just spotted a cockroach and whipped my flip-flop off and whacked it before I even thought about what I was doing. It's like... Okay, there are some of them around. And then telling other visitors, they only crawl, they don't fly at you. And then they started flying. Like, oh, no.
Wow, okay. So it became normal, I suppose.
Oh, it was really normal.
Very quickly, a few months or a year in, certainly you've done the whole seasonal thing. And then, okay, I know what each season will look like.
Yes, I think we used to come back to the UK every second year. And after the 2 years, we came back and thought, right, okay, so we were quite gentle on ourselves on the visit, but we still felt quite connected with the UK. When we came back at 4 years, we'd really done the shift, because at 4 years it was like, oh, blow, I could have done that easier in Africa. Oh, I don't feel at home here. I can't find what I need here. And suddenly we realised that somewhere between 2 years and 4 years, we had made home. Home was really Africa.
Interesting. And what lessons did you learn from the culture that you've carried with you now and you'll always carry with you probably? What would you say that you just think, I would never have thought like that, or have learned about God even just by being in a different culture that sort of challenged you? Yeah,
we'd obviously chosen a simple lifestyle. And I think the simplicity was really something that's caught all of us, living simply, not extravagantly, so that things were a tool so that we can do what God wants us to do, rather than because they're things to collect. So I think that was a huge thing. But finding God in relationships, having time to be with people and just share life with them was just great. It was challenging, living so much in the spotlight. Like I said, after the first year, we moved to live in a different compound, and we actually spent 10.5 years living with the same couple. There were others that came and went, but we spent a local couple, and we spent 10.5 years with them. We read about living our lives in the light, and the non-believers see our lives, and it's like, yeah, they do here. Before even the first loo trip in the morning, you're bumping into people. And that was, a real privilege to live life and to go around the market and think, oh no, I really want that and I want that. And then think, oh, but we have a tiny house and I don't like clutter. So, there's living simply, there's no cure for materialism, but you just have to still take the same decisions not to collect stuff. You never quite know the legacy or the impact that you have on people.
Were conversations about Jesus and prayer and God quite common for you?
Yes, because that's how we lived life. Not everybody would let me pray for them in Jesus' name. I had one lady, I think she was quite strongly into the occult. She refused. But I did pray a lot. There were 2 particular kids I prayed for a lot, babies or young children. One had cerebral palsy and one had hydrocephalus, and he lived in the neighbourhood. He was born just after we'd left one summer, and I didn't realise until I came back, and some months after, that his mother always had him covered up on her lap. And so we helped organise an operation for him, but actually it was really too late. His brain was very damaged, couldn't develop with all of the water in his head. But the neighbours, you know, they saw me praying and going and organised medication for him, and you know, we didn't see what I'd hoped for. Miraculous healing would have been wonderful, but we didn't see that. God's grace. I mean, when we left, I just prayed, Lord, you know, have mercy, have mercy. And the lad did actually die some while after, but he died just as Andrew was making a visit after we left, and he was able to then help with the burial. And it just was quite a poignant that he died at that point, that Andrew could complete kind of the love and care we'd had for him and for the family.
It's tough, isn't it, when you're in a country that healthcare is not great and disease is often around, and people don't know what to do, or they go to the hospital but you still have to feed yourself at the hospital, or people coming and going. I don't know if you had a lot of that, but
there's huge ignorance. So the neighbour in the first compound, I found her once, she had onion in her ear or something. I was like, what are you doing? She said, but I've got terrible toothache, and I think if I put onion in my ear, it's going to make it better. I said, I don't think so. And so I was often involved in helping out. I'm not medically trained, but you get quite good at wound care and things, and that can make a huge difference. Or advice about gut. So rehydration, getting people drinking the right stuff when they've got gut issues. And one time, one of our kids rushed in and said, Mom, there's a boy outside. Ugh. And he made such a face. He said, you need to look at, I don't want to, but you need to have a look at his hand. He needs you. And I think he was it was a kid I didn't know, but he'd injured, and he was just hovering around in the street outside our house. I think actually hoping to be found. And I cleaned up his nasty infected wound and bandaged it as best I could. Told him without any faith that he'd manage it, to say, try and keep it clean, keep it dry. And then a couple of weeks later, he came back, and the bandage was off, but it was looking better. So I did the same again, and I never saw him again. And I think that was probably one hand that was saved, because you often see infections were just not treated well. Yeah, that was something I had the privilege of doing. Was
occult a big part of?
Occult was huge.
I mean, I suppose sometimes they think, well, this problem I'm facing is the occult, and perhaps it was.
Yes, so everybody had charms on them, pinned in their hair, pinned on their clothes, strung around their waists, pinned on arms. Huge rites when a child is born, things that would happen. I noticed one time that one of our kids was missing some hair, neatly cut off where you couldn't see it. I was like, how did that happen? And that got me praying, really praying for protection over this child.
Yes, I'd heard there was a connection between witchcraft and using people's hair to cast spells on them. Did that impact you guys at all spiritually? Or?
I'm not sure directly. Yes, it must have done, but I can't think of situations right now.
Yeah, I mean, maybe even they would be surprised that you didn't go through all the rituals and the protection charms, certainly. And you were still okay.
Yes.
Must have challenged them a bit.
Yeah, and we had a couple of major car accidents or less major car accidents when we travelled, and we lived under God's grace. I mean, it was amazing that we didn't have more accidents or just personal accidents or the kids' health issues or our own. But one of the car accidents, we were coming back. We'd taken a break out of country and we were coming back. And one of our kids, we were in a taxi, so we weren't driving ourselves. And one of the kids bent down because he dropped a bit of Lego and was on the floor of the car. at which point a camel smashed into the car and the window that was right next to him smashed and broke and went all over us. But if he'd have been sat up, he would have got it full force in his face. As it was, the camel got up and ran away, and we got out of the car, and people appeared from nowhere, and we lifted the back seat out of the car and shook off the glass and got back in and carried home. But my sister was later saying, we were remembering that you were traveling that day, and we prayed and asked God's protection on you. And you think, just that timing of how that happened, just when the child was ducked out of the way, was great. And another accident where, it was our foolishness, really. We were making one of these trips down to that village that I told you about, and it was a slow journey. I can't remember why, and we just wanted to do that last bit, but it was dark and you don't really travel that bit at night, and it wasn't great, but we just thought, we'll go. And we had a driver and a car full of people, and our driver was on a track leading up to a bridge and didn't know and couldn't see that some of this road had been washed away, and we basically fell into a ditch, hitting the wall of concrete of the side of the bridge. And the windscreen was damaged. The guys in the front whacked their heads against it. But apart from bruises and bent glasses, really, none of us was majorly harmed. They hauled the car out. We just showed up in the nearby village, went back to slightly tail between our legs for our presumption. And people rolled out mats, and we slept and spent the night there. And the next morning they tied the car to a tree and forced back the bars from the front and enabled us. We carried on going, and that was God's grace. We really had just pushed on when we shouldn't have done. We didn't really ask him, but we came through that.
Gosh, just give us a tiny snippet of what was the situation of the emerging church, if at all, during your time there. Any believers around?
Yeah, there were believers. So the people that we joined, team leaders, were already working amongst these people. And the team leader was a huge evangelist. Andrew spent a lot of time showing the Jesus film, because with no language, you can sit in a hot room and sweat while people watch the Jesus film. So that was quite good for his language learning. But initially, we were working in the sort of get somebody interested and bring them into a group kind of thinking, which changed fairly soon after. In the early years of our being there, it's much better to get people to share and work in communities that exist already, because there was huge mistrust between people who didn't know each other and who naturally weren't part of the same communities. So that was something that we realised wasn't working, and but there was a general shift in thinking going on at the same time. There was a ladies group, which again, with no language, I tended to be not very directly involved with. And they had a sort of mixed relationship with the Lord. I'm not sure. I think it was quite comfortable for them to get given a good meal when they often weren't getting good meals, and just have the comfort of going and sitting in a place and being welcomed. I'm not quite sure fully what the Lord was doing amongst all of them. There's certainly some more than others, some very significantly. And I personally had quite a complicated relationship with these women, which was difficult. Yeah, my more comfortable place for sharing was amongst my neighbours in the neighbourhood. But some of these guys carried on and grew in faith, and it's very early church days. They had never been a witness up until about 30 years before we were there. So if you think of a culture that's totally not built on any kind of truth or gospel values, it was a huge start, very much like New Testament times. And if you read the New Testament, you can pick bits out and think, oh, that's amazing. And then you go, oh, but that was messy. Oh, that didn't go well. And actually, we were living in a lot of that as well.
And then there was an occasion also where your teammates had a episode of violence. Is that right?
Yeah, there was somebody in the city who he wasn't actually on the team, but he was a team leader, and he was shot and killed. And that rocked us all, you can imagine. It rocked us personally as a family, because we knew him. Our kids knew their kids. It rocked us as a team. And then in the wider community. And it was a huge loss and so shocking, because normally in our country it was quiet, very much a backwater city in so many ways, and very quiet. But this was huge. And so we had to get our heads around it in terms of the family was supporting them. The other family had support and were looked after by their organisation, but needed to leave quite quickly because we weren't sure to start with whether this was directed at this person or whether it was directed at part of a more general thing.
Like because they're a foreigner or because they're a Christian, it's just hard to know sometimes.
Yes, didn't know. And because it was so unexpected, the family left very quickly, and we as a team took on a lot of their project work and helped the rest of the team manage that to start with. But there was a huge fear, and I remember thinking, well, okay, so he's gone and Andrew's team leader and head of NGO, and well, if there's a pattern here, gosh. And I was like, I don't believe in fear, but my body's telling me I'm full of fear, because I was shaking, and I put on worship music, and that didn't do any good for hours. And then I just thought, okay, I just name it, and I said, fear, I'm talking to you. I'm a child of the living God. He is my protector. And I tell you, you have no place in my life because I am secure with him. And fear, go in Jesus' name. And it did. It was just remarkable. Suddenly, I mean, I had this sort of exhaustion of my muscles because I'd been shaking for so long, but fear had gone. And that was really amazing. In the team, we then needed to look at, do we stay? Do we go? But within Frontiers, I think a lot of people, because of the kind of places we work, we'd kind of already wrestled that question out, and we were all willing to stay and carry on. And in the wider community, there were a number of people who'd gone there because it was a safe and comfortable, and moderately, depends how you choose to live, but comfortable place to be. But there were some who were away out on furlough, and so they heard the news and didn't get the actually life's carrying on picture. And a lot of people, their churches who supported them said they heard the outside picture and the news but didn't know the reality in country. And so some people were pulled against their will. Some people chose not to come back for a time. Wow. And there was a lot of investigation as to how this all came about. But for Andrew himself, he wrestled with God about how did that happen, but as part of a bigger story. But the local people he went and talked to said, because of this situation, we need you to stay. We have opportunities to share now like we never had before, because this is all public.
So this is local believers?
Local believers.
Talking to Andrew?
Yes. Yep. And so we felt very much the commission to stay on. There was another incident that same summer, and we'd lent the kids back to the grandparents for some of the summer, and we did wonder whether they were going to give them back, but they did. Yeah. And we pressed on. But that was not to minimise the story for the family who experienced that huge loss, but God has taken care of them, and that would be their story.
That nicely, in a sense, leads on to some questions I have about member care generally. I mean, obviously, I'm glad you just mentioned that little episode about those who were pulled by their organisations, because we at Frontiers, we're a team, we're a field-led organisation, so we don't pull people. It's up to the team leaders on the field to decide whether it's a safety issue or a strategy issue. And I think that's very important because on the ground what really is changing. But I don't know, how was your support in terms of member care, and how did you end up, coming back to the UK and taking on this role as head of member care? You've seen how important that can be, personally, I suppose, and as a family, and how does that impact your role now and what you do?
Yeah, when we came back after 12 years, we thought, well, better do some debriefing. So we said to the office, okay, so we'd like to be debriefed. And they said, oh, great idea. Let us know where you go. It's like, oh, okay. So there was no debriefing offered in the office at that time. So we took ourselves off. But that sowed seeds, I think, in terms of thinking it was so valuable to be heard, so valuable to have that safe place to unpack and actually talk about some of those things that Andrew and I had got to the point where we couldn't talk about them anymore because we had such different perspectives. Wow. And we bottled it down because we couldn't discuss it ourselves. And after a couple of years back in our home city, we took up the invitation to move down to the offices. Andrew was working at the international office, and I was like, well, what would I do if I came down? And the Lord spoke very clearly about member care. I didn't want to uproot the family unless it was definitely God speaking as clearly as he had for us going overseas. But I stand on a few very core things. God has created us for good works. And he's created the good works. He's prepared them for us to do. And that can evolve in different seasons. But we all have value. But we're also masterpieces that he hasn't finished with yet. And so he's at work, and we're really important and significant. But there are issues in our lives that he hasn't got to yet. And God's more patient than maybe we are. Although, we wouldn't want him to radically change everything in our lives all at once, but it's his steady working in our lives. And so member care is that wonderful privilege of walking alongside people through thick and thin. Our mission statement for the member care team is that we help people to become the people God intends them to be, so that they can do what he's called them to do. And recognizing that the Bible's full of people that God's not finished with, but he uses them. And so really being that safe place, that safe person to listen to, who's not the church, who has a vested interest in maybe seeing things working out well, or the team who might be part of the issue, actually, sometimes, because teams are a great strength, but they are also a challenge at times, is we offer that safe place to tell it where it's at. And we hope to catch the issues that are going on in people's lives while they're still small, before they get bigger, because the bigger the issue, the bigger the mess. So we work quite hard. I head up a team. It's not just me. I head up a team of great people who are really good at listening and who are able to listen with understanding. And team situations evolve and church situations evolve, but we aim to be those consistent people in different seasons that understand. And so we spend a lot of time just tracking with people, just hearing the ordinary stuff, because that builds relationship, that builds trust, that builds interest, so that when people have got something they need to share, they know that they can come to us. And we're not highly trained, but if we need specialties, we can refer on. But it's really helpful for somebody to have somewhere to go. And so there's a number of situations that I could think of. But one is where a worker is newly on a team and there's just a complete mismatch of understanding and communication. It was in a difficult season of life where the team leader was understanding one thing and the team member thought they were communicating something else. And it's quite hard if you're a single team member to talk to a team leader couple, because the power balance is really quite something. So quite often we'll step in as advocates for a season and to hear what's going on and to then get the next level of help with that situation.
And I suppose you could also refer, if you find out as the first point of contact for one individual or a couple, you could then recommend, I think we might need to involve our overseers, directors of the sending-based church leaders at some point you could bring into a situation, or the peacemaking team. That's what I'm thinking of.
Yes, certainly. And we did, and we do.
Yeah.
There's other times where you're in that privileged place of praying with somebody when they've experienced something truly awful. And yet they know God is good, and those two things don't match up. And you're just sitting there praying and say, Lord, if you don't show up, I really have no answer right now. I have no answer how to bridge that gap between that truly awful thing and the knowledge that you are good. And then God just does it in an amazing way. And you're just like, oh my goodness. No person can explain that, but God touches somebody's heart in such a way that makes sense to them and proves that he is good, even though that really difficult thing happened.
It's powerful. Because you must come across a lot of stories of disappointment and frustration and conflict and we're all broken, aren't we? And it's the same in church leadership. Pastors in churches have the same thing.
Yes, but I think there's a huge value in creating that safe place to talk about things as they crop up. And it is a dilemma in member care because we're just hearing one side of the story. Mm-hmm. And in wanting to be the safe place and you want to believe them, but actually it is their perspective. And I'm aware of things I experienced and struggled with on the field that really were really, really hard. I mean, marriage stuff even, where Andrew and I had different perspectives on things. And it was just really tough. And there weren't any answers at that point. But gradually, over time, I realised that, okay, that was my perspective. And whilst we might have disagreed about it, there's a huge other side to my husband that I value and is huge and brilliant and I love so much. And so there's just recognising that we only ever see a little bit, even of ourselves in our own story. We don't see the whole picture. And so holding on to what is it, Lord, that you want to do? What are you doing right now? You are good. How can you prove that you're good in this situation? How can we hold on to your goodness? What do you want to do when you are going to bring good out of really difficult situations for those who love you and walking humbly with you and are willing to do that?
Yeah, this is really good. And I mean, our sending bases all around the world have member care teams, and it's so important to us, isn't it? Because the other thing with folks in church leadership or doing the kind of work that we do is that there can be a shame about expressing vulnerability, and the very fact that we have member carers asking good questions, being a safe space, gives people permission to just break some of the shame around, well, I'm supposed to be super spiritual out there doing amazing things for God, and I can't. What if I'm not feeling it or I'm struggling?
No, and again, like I said before, we don't suddenly become super spiritual people when we get on the plane. We are very much the same people, and we're struggling with the same issues of family life or singleness or marriage issues or parenting children.
Temptation and anxiety.
And all of the spiritual stuff. Yeah, and the enemy is out. He is prowling around. But what are we standing on? And we don't suddenly become different people. I think within this organisation, we've got quite good at training churches. Like, this is the long haul. We're long haul people. So don't expect numbers. And I think we've got quite good at that. But it is still a question of, can member care offer that safe place to just get it all out there so that you can place all the stuff on the table and begin to understand it, whether you're a verbal processor or whether it's just need to get thoughts in order to then have the other conversation with that teammate or somebody in the family, or just deal with it with God. What is the issue? Why am I feeling so whatever? And wrestle it out with God. But sometimes it's really helpful to identify and know ourselves better, because we don't know ourselves fully.
That's right. Yeah.
That's why Psalm says, search my heart and know me. Show me any unclean way, because we don't know ourselves fully.
Have our blind spots.
Yes, yeah.
This is so good, Harriet. I'm aware that time is running out. Do you have any final tips or thoughts you just want to give to us at the end?
Yeah, I think one thing I would like to say, I used to think that choice was hugely powerful, that if we've chosen to do something, that we'll have the strength to do it. But I think more than that, actually, sometimes that leaves God out of it. And so knowing that we're doing what he's asked us to do and we're in the right place and in the right community, then God can help us do things that we never thought we could do. So I think choice isn't the end of the answer, but let's not leave God out of it.
Yes, I like that, because some people say, God will never give you more than you can handle. And there's a verse that touches on something around that, but he often comes through when we can't handle things.
Yes,
and so
absolutely.
Yeah, it's not quite as simple as sometimes people make out.
And for where we lived and the way we lived, I never would have persuaded anybody, any of the visitors who came to check us out as a team. I wouldn't ever try and persuade anybody to come. There had to be God's calling, because it's just too messy to try and carry the weight of somebody else's learning to live somewhere. They have to be able to stand on their own calling. And so I guess the question of what are the good works that God's prepared for you in this season? And seasons do change, but right now, and what's God asking you to do? And maybe people don't know. It's not written on the wall. It's not a huge big thing. But just start with loving God and loving people, and see where that takes you. But it is worth looking at our values. What are the rocks on which we stand, the scriptures? I've named a number of things that have been my rocks and continue to be as we've gone through different seasons in our own family and in the team, and then moving around and into the work I'm doing now. It's like, what are the pieces, the values I hold, the sense of where God has shown me that he is faithful, that I'm holding on to, and the truths that he tells us in his word that we can hold on to. I think it's worth having a think about that, because I've heard somebody else say, who's been through a tough time, it was our values that held us when everything about the situation was really, really tough. Holding on to the values that we had was crucial.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for being with us. I'm sure we could talk a lot more, but
thanks for having me.
All right.
Great.
God bless.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Thanks for being with us today, guys. As we close, I want to offer you a gift. It's a beautiful invitation to come and join in with the mission of God, the transformational, life-giving gospel work that he has set before us. The Lord asks in Isaiah, "Who will go? Whom shall I send?" Could it be you? Might you be willing to lay it all down, to give up everything for the one who gave up everything for you? To join one of our teams in Central Asia, the Gulf, Africa, Asia, the Balkans or the Caucasus? Or to support some of our work through prayer and finances? If your heart is stirred to respond, do reach out to us. You can contact me on matt@frontiers.org.uk or visit our website, frontiers.org.uk, or you can check out our social media platforms @FrontiersUK. God bless, guys, and do join us next time for some more inspirational and challenging stories.